Hi, this is John Leslie. Game development requires a multitude of different disciplines. Engineers, artists, animators, audio, etc. all need to come together simultaneously to build immersive, interactive experiences for players. For this reason, team-based capacities like velocity and throughput often don't fully answer the question, do we have enough and the right people to build this by a certain date? That's where per person and per discipline capacity planning comes into play. This template will help determine if certain people are overallocated per sprint, milestone, or release. It can also show capacity per discipline for any time box you choose. Favro's capacity planning limits, combined with flexible boards, let you measure capacity versus scope any way you choose, and ensure you always have the right people with the right disciplines to deliver what you promise. Let me walk you through the template. So here at the top of the collection, you can see that we have a board for a cross-functional team per release and also one for a single sprint. So starting here, if I open up one of these boards, the release board, you can see that the team is broken down. Each individual member has their own column. And within that column, we've set a capacity limit for each one of the individual team members for this entire release. So we can see that John has a capacity of 310 hours, 129 hours of which have been allocated. Bella has 440 hours, 81 hours have been allocated, etc., etc. So to set these limits, what you do is you click on each individual column, go to Set Limit, and the first thing that you're going to want to do is tie the column limit to a custom field. So if you want to measure by hours, you're probably going to tie it to a work remaining column in the currency hours. You might want to tie it to an estimate column in days, or maybe you're measuring capacity in points. However you want to measure it, that's the custom field that you want to tie this limit to, and that will propagate throughout the entire board. So here in this case, we're measuring capacity by hour. So we've tied this to a work remaining column that is in the currency hours. Now here I'm going to set the limit. So how much availability capacity does John have in this release? And that's 310 hours. Similarly for the sprint, this is obviously a smaller time box. So in this smaller time box, the sprint, John, the same team member, has 71 hours of capacity, 66 hours which have been actually allocated with the work that you see here. That's the same thing to set this. Simply went to Set Limit, the smaller limit tied to that same work remaining custom field. Now you can see here that everything's in the green. This is the total capacity for the team, which is a sum of all the team member capacity limits. If I now add additional work, so this scrum board, for example, for that same team, which could of course live in another collection, I have it here for the sake of example. Add a new card representing a new deliverable or a new increment of value. And this might have a points estimate, but also it's been broken down into tasks and has a work remaining estimate, 15 hours. Now when I assign this to John, you can see that it automatically added the same card to those capacity boards to the appropriate columns. So if I go back up to the sprint capacity board, we can see now that card being added to John's column, 15 hours, has now over allocated him. He has 81 hours of scope, work that's assigned to him, versus his 71 hours of capacity, turning this column red, indicating that John is overallocated. You can see that the board limit has turned yellow, indicating that even though we're not over capacity for the entire team total of 243 hours, at least one person on this board is now overallocated. In this case, John. If we open up the release board for this same team, you can see that this now rolls up to 144 hours. Still fine for the release, but however, John is over capacity for the sprint. We can also see this over time. If we switch to a timeline view, we can see how under or over allocated each team member is on a timeline here. So for example, Isabella is perfectly balanced, allocated over time, whereas John is over-allocated potentially during these particular dates where there's multiple things assigned to him that need to be delivered at the same time. You can also see these capacities by discipline. So John is an engineer in this particular example. So when that work was assigned to John, it also added that work to an engineering column. Here we have capacities by discipline for whatever this time box happens to represent. Maybe it's an entire release, maybe it's a single sprint, that's up to you. As you can see, we have 300 hours of capacity for engineering. That new card, because John is an engineer, was also added here, rolling up and adding 15 hours here for a grand total of 74 hours of engineering scope versus 300 hours of engineering capacity. If you want a faster way to enter in capacity limits, simply open up the board, go to the board menu, layout, limits, and here in a single dialog box, you're able to enter in the capacity for each and every team member in this case. You can also override the calculated total if you choose to, and you can also choose to enforce limits. And there you have it, a capacity planning template in Favro.